Hello and welcome to another episode of Phrasally Verbocious. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Grand.
Grand so. So this week we're discussing parsnips.
Yes, so my dad is a vegetable grower and, hang on, not those kind of parsnips. The ELT parsnips. So the ELT parsnips are the things traditionally you're not supposed to talk about in the ELT classroom.
And in fact, we often don't see them in ELT published materials as well.
Especially not the mainstream stuff, no. So for anybody wondering, the old parsnips, as it may be, are politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms, and pork. So these are the old things we're not supposed to talk about if we're one of those 1980s ELT textbooks. Chris, you've steered clear of all of those parsnips, haven't you?
Well, no, I haven't steered clear of them. I don't drink with my students, and I don't think there have been any kind of references to alcohol in my lessons. But no, I've certainly discussed religion in my classes, even in the sense of getting students to talk to me. I'm in Spain, getting students to tell me in English about the Semana Santa traditions or what they do at Christmas. I understand the thinking behind why they were traditionally proscribed, especially in the sense of when you're trying to produce a course or some course materials that might be used globally.
Yeah.
But I think the idea of ignoring all of these in a discrete classroom is impossible. I mean, I work in Spain. The idea of never mentioning pork. I'm a vegan. I'm a vegan, and I discuss pork in my classrooms.
Yeah, we used to work in Cáceres, where Jamón Ibérico used to come from. I mean, there's no way that you could ever not bring that up. Obviously this is for the general international universal English classroom as opposed to
right. Yeah,
Extremadura.
Exactly. But I mean, one of the best ways of getting a student to be quiet in Cáceres was to ask them whether they would rather give up jamón or chocolate, or jamón or cheese. And
jamón or cheese. Now there's a question.
The internal meltdown would be something to behold. So no. I definitely haven't avoided them. I don't necessarily think that there should be. I mean, age is an important factor, but I don't think there should necessarily be proscribed topics in classrooms.
Yeah. I'm still on the jamón or cheese. Which would I give up? I honestly don't think I could answer that.
And I don't eat either of them, so I gave them up a long time ago.
No, I just couldn't. No way. Couldn't do it. Anyway, has there ever been a point in a classroom where you've done something, or maybe you've said something, or maybe just it's the material you're using, and for some reason or another, maybe it's not that you haven't fallen foul to parsnips, but have you fallen foul to something you just go, oh, didn't know that the entire room wouldn't take to that, and then had to switch quite quickly?
Is that not just teaching?
Well, yeah, that's teaching. But an example I would use was, not going to say thrown in at the deep end, but I was doing something and the other teacher knew what was coming and let me do it. So kind of finding out the hard way kind of thing. So long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, although still sometimes, we teach in the Belfast Islamic Centre to mainly refugees and asylum seekers who are all sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. And long time ago, this would have been 2015. So I was teaching a A1 class and using one of the mainstream textbooks, which I won't name, but it might become obvious which one it was in a minute. And the way the book introduced the past tense was through two characters, which normally you think grand, but in this instance the two characters were two dogs, and I hadn't really worked out that two dogs as two characters in a textbook, in an adult textbook, wasn't suitable for Arabic L1 students. And they weren't really getting it. You know, the grammar, the material, the past tense, because this is the first time they'd ever seen past tense in English. And I was like, right, obviously I hadn't twigged that the two dogs was the issue. I was sitting there going, all right, is it how I'm explaining it? Is it the EDs? Is it, there's a couple of irregulars in here. So I was looking at the grammar itself, that kind of thing, and maybe sentence structure. And it wasn't until I spotted two students in the corner having a conversation, pointed at the dogs, going, all right, that's the whole issue. It's the idea of the dogs in general. You would never, when they're L1 in their, education, you would never have characters as dogs, and you would never, it just wouldn't be appropriate.
Can you perhaps explain why?
From their background. It's because it's just how dogs are seen.
Okay.
They ask their caricatures, they're cute and cuddly. There's 3 of them running around here, and the great crack, whereas other cultures might not see that the same way. Right. So I was like, oh, okay. So for the rest of the class, we stopped using the books. And then the next day I came in, I basically had to rewrite and then print out an entire different way of getting the tense across, because it never dawned on me before. I was a much younger, naiver teacher.
Well, yeah, but I think this was something we were talking about last time, wasn't it? About starting the small stuff and being aware of, not necessarily that you can't be aware of all the cultural differences between our culture and student cultures, but just being aware that there might be. Suddenly these problems can come to the forefront.
Yeah, they're the ones you don't really expect as much. Now, in fairness, I think Parsnips with Middle Eastern students and Sub-Saharan African students, I think there was a lot more awareness of what should be talked about and what shouldn't. Whereas, in Spain, like the last couple of years has been hilarious with, I remember I had an adult class last year who were following the end of what they called it, the 2 biggest TV shows going on at the minute, which was the end of Game of Thrones and as they put it, the end of the United Kingdom with Brexit coming up.
Right.
So the final two seasons of both shows, which they find it quite funny to talk about. But I mean, I think to hide behind Parsnips in classes sometimes can be quite negative, because I mean, negative stuff happens in life, as well. I don't think it's just a case of don't ever talk about these things. I mean, even you were talking about some of the kids there, like Semana Santa is a major thing for some churches, which our students will be a part of.
Yeah. Well, I had a student who, for their Trinity presentation, every year talked about the Semana Santa.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That was his thing. I mean, I think he even had a blog on Blogspot or whatever. Like, yeah, absolutely. So to not talk about it would have been unnatural.
Yeah, and quite offensive, really, when you think about it.
Well, yeah, just sort of silencing a part of their local culture.
Yeah.
Or at least ignoring it. And of course, I think as with so many of these things, context, if not everything, context is all. Yes, actually, to ignore Semana Santa in a monolingual class in Spanish at or around Semana Santa would actually be the weird thing, I think. Because even if you're not religiously, if you're Spanish, you may not be religiously a believer, but you have your cultural roots are within this tradition. So you may not be a fan of Semana Santa, but you're not gonna. If we discuss it in class, you're not gonna walk out. And actually, even those that don't necessarily like it that much have been very enthusiastic to tell me, the foreigner, about it.
Yeah.
You'll never believe what we do at Easter, Chris.
I think one of the things with international classes as well, when there's a mix of nationalities, is one of the positive ways of talking about it is to celebrate the differences. So it's,
yes,
how does it go on there? How does it go on there? How does it go on with you? And then we go, we're actually learning a lot of, it's like it's a couple of documentaries all at once. We're learning about 5 or 6 different, nationalities and cultures and religions. I think it's fantastic. Again, the only problem I've ever had with and how does it go on with you is in Belfast, but that's pretty common. So the reason why we brought up Parsnips right now is that in December of last year, so December 2019, on the IATEFL MaWSIG, so that's the IATEFL Special Interest Group for Materials Writing, Aleksandra Popovski put up an article on the 3 E's of material writing, which was based on what she talked about at the ELT Council Malta Conference. And what she said in that was quite interesting because she mentioned a new version of Parsnips, which stuck with me and I thought is quite an important read. So we're going to put a link to the article in the show notes, as always. So what she's done is she created her own list of parsnips where she said in ELT material and the ELT classrooms itself, we should, instead of the old parsnips, we should be using peace, action, representation, self-care, non-violence, inquiry, and perseverance.
So she says kind of positive parsnips in that sense.
Yeah, so not things you shouldn't use, but things you definitely should. And then she says in the future, it'll probably change again depending on issues that arise. So we thought we'd take one of these at a time. So the first one, peace. I think with peace is just, I normally talk about, the good old days, the internet, and everybody should just, can't we all just get along kind of thing. I think it's, celebrating our differences and celebrating the individual is a part of that, really. I do one thing this way, but you do one thing that way. And that's grand. Let's talk about it.
And in fact, I think actually, I know that it was actually my suggestion to do them one by one, but actually I think we can link together peace and non-violence here. And actually looking at other ways to resolve disagreement and, looking at understanding of other people, like you're saying, celebrating difference, but also using and teaching debate and discussion as a means to resolve disagreement, or at least, if not to resolve it, like it's more productive to engage in debate with somebody you disagree with than it is to be aggressive or violent.
Talk. Simple as that. Talk. Yeah. Although I think as I say, that's basically our bread and butter as language teachers is teaching people to use language to achieve ends, right? Yeah. So like I don't think it's asking us to do that much more, but like I think actually maybe our more advanced students, I'm not talking about like the little people, but like showing them that debate and discussion as a way to resolve more than just which is the most important reason for encouraging tourists to our town. Like the reason that this skill is being assessed is because actually in the real world, being able to use debating and discussion tactics, active listening, have positive real world effects. I think just on one word that you said there, just to make a call back to one of our previous podcasts, was what James Taylor said when he said, you got to just be careful how debate is done, because it's very easy. It's very easy to make that binary, as in we agree this is good and this is bad. Whereas by debate we mean just a conversation more than anything else.
Absolutely.
On a topic, as opposed to black and white binary. This is good, this is bad, sort of thing.
Right, and that's why I was referring to the spider, the part 3 in the first certificate, for example, where this is not about not debate in an aggressive sense or a serious sense, but just like these skills that we're teaching you here aren't just to get you through part 3 of the first certificate exam. And that's why also that active listening is really important. Yeah, and because that is a route to de-escalation by showing the person that you're listening. Rather than just talking at somebody, like that's a route to de-escalating situations.
The next one brought up is action. Now, when I thought action, the first thing that came to mind is new things that are springing up, like ELT footprint. So it's one of those organizations that were nominated for an Elton this year. Just making it's more green awareness, more environmental awareness, and more awareness in the classroom of even the basic things of how many times are you going to print that, compared to, using a course book, that kind of thing. Yeah. I think it's quite an impressive job. The new things they've brought into it, and just the new awareness. But I mean, action can be as simple as just an awareness of a topic. Mm-hmm. I had a great one. I had a great lesson this year. I'd taken it from the Teaching English as a Lingua Franca book. The Why is English a Global Language lesson they had in that, and I was surprised that my students were surprised when they seen things like the inner circles of English, or the circles of English. So like there's the inner circle of the UK, the US, then the outer circle, and then the expanding circle of things like China, Russia, Brazil, and all. Just making people aware that this is a thing could be a positive action in the classroom as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting. I think my point on this point is that I saw online a couple of weeks ago a post about the types of teacher, right, at summer schools, and one of them was the I can't think what the expression that was used, but it was basically the social justice warrior teacher, who has to teach all this stuff in their lessons rather than just teaching them, plain grammar. And the discussion underneath was really, why do these people do it? I don't know. And people didn't understand why you do this. Like, do they not understand that their job is to teach English, nothing else? And I was just reminded again, actually, of that pod discussion with James Taylor and Ila Coimbra, and also my own research. But to say nothing is to take a position.
Yeah.
So by bringing these things into your classroom, you're being no more political than if you don't. Mm-hmm. And I think it's getting our heads around that being silent is just as
powerful as bringing it up. Yeah.
Yes, by not mentioning the status quo, you are tacitly agreeing with it. So I think we need to be aware of that if we don't say anything, then we're kind of endorsing something, which we may not actually endorse.
Yeah. So the next one, the R of the new Parsnips, representation, something you and me have talked about before.
And actually, we discussed last time the importance of, for example, learner feedback. Mm-hmm. And like hearing,
making everyone in the room feeling part of the class. Right. And definitely not isolating anybody in the room either.
Yeah.
After that, we go into self-care. What's your take on self-care in the classroom?
I think it's a big topic, and I think it's something that maybe we're becoming more aware of, sort of as a culture, and the importance of self-care and looking after ourselves. I've just rewritten our syllabuses for first and advanced for our academy, and one of the things that I agreed with my manager on that I was going to do was that each unit would have some sort of wider learning goal. So I've gone through the material that's already printed and found sort of a theme that we might call a wider learning goal, and they vary, but many of them are on developing personal qualities, which might be sort of healthy ways of recognizing your own achievements.
I think self-care, you can almost subdivide self-care into quite a lot of different stuff. So self-care in one way could be a similar representation, really, with diversity in the classroom. Yes. But then there's the emotional intelligence version of self-care, and then there's getting through exam self-care, and even boiling down to your personal and mental health. So there's quite a lot to take from self-care itself.
I also think it links to perseverance as well, which is the final P in the new Parsnip. Yeah. That it's these personal qualities that, again, who are we to be teaching these in our English classroom? Well, by not teaching them, we're just being silent on things that really matter. And perhaps we should be a bit more explicit about what we're doing, because we're probably doing this anyway. And like my whole mantra of thank you for your mistake, that's, I think, falls under self-care as well. And learning to make mistakes in a positive way.
Yeah.
And not take every error as a personal failing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's especially with adult students, that's the first thing. It's okay when they're young learners, they're in school anyway, but they might see your class as something different. But especially with adults who maybe haven't been in the classroom for decades, possibly,
or even if they have, but they put I would hate to teach me language with the pressure I put on myself, even though I have this mantra of thank you for your mistake. That doesn't mean I live that as a student, right? But also I'm thinking of other adult students who may have been in the classroom relatively recently, but the pressure they put on themselves, or maybe, and I'm thinking of particular individuals at the moment, maybe they spent a year in an English-speaking country, and therefore they think that their English is or should be better than it is. And actually, the thing that gets most in their way in the classroom is their head.
Yeah.
Or
their idea of what they want.
If they got out of their heads, they would actually be quite decent English speakers, but they're so busy trying to say it as Englishly as possible that they end up saying a bunch of gibberish in comparison with what they could I know that they know. Yeah. Just kind of relaxing and being happy to make mistakes, being able to sort of see your way through the maze, I suppose. Yeah.
I suppose it's an easy thing to say outside the classroom, but when you're actually in the classroom as that student, it does affect you. And I think different people, being in the classroom, especially as an adult, because I've spent a lot of time in the classroom myself this year, you do go back to what you were like when you were 14 in a way, and then the adult brain in your head sort of fights back as well. So there's the what your body thinks it should be doing because it has a vague memory of all of this. And then there's the brain, your current brain's going, actually, hang on, if I can just do that, you're fine. But it's easier said than done until you're actually in that situation. But again, it's also why you're there. What is your motivation for being in the classroom? Is it, last year I had in one class, a load of people taking the first exam, but some people were just there for something to do at the same time. So maybe, there was people putting pressure on themselves a lot more as well. So then,
and that's what I was meaning by some of these students who, if they just relaxed and enjoyed the lesson, it would be, their English would be better.
So the next point, non-violence. Since we're, it's our workplace. One of the things I remember, you can especially an off the cuff comment can sometimes go very wrong. Especially if culture comes into it. So I've been talking about this for a few friends recently, and we were talking about how dark the Irish humor can be. Even compared to the UK, maybe it's to do with our history, who knows? And believe me, it definitely doesn't translate in other countries. But one thing that I remember sticks with me in talking about non-violence and the workplace was a Northern Irish TV presenter. He works with BBC, Colin Murray. Actually gets sacked from Match of the Day 2 on the BBC because one of the comments he made was, if a footballer is arguing with another footballer on the pitch, he argued, is it not just easier if you smack the guy and get on with it? Which on a national TV channel, probably not what you should have said. In the pub is just a standard comment. So you got to be very aware of things not translating culturally, even if it's the same language, never mind a different language as well.
I also think as language teachers, we need to be aware of, and as you were saying, in that respect, they're taking it a step further, that there is inherent violence in words.
Yeah.
And when we talk about non-violence, we're not just talking about physical violence, because hopefully there's no physical violence in our classrooms, but that actually there is a violence inherent in words, and that microaggressions, the choice of language, words we use to describe people, in Spanish, it's a lot more easy to noun adjectives in a way that in English has become much less acceptable and now sounds quite aggressive, or can sound racist, it can sound homophobic, it can sound misogynistic, in a way that it doesn't have the same connotations in Spanish when it's said in Spanish. I mean, people will say, actually, it does sound quite, diminutive, but it doesn't have the same violent power as it does in English. And like taking those moments to say, oh, hang on, you just said, the something, that doesn't work so well in English. That sounds quite aggressive in English.
Especially when it comes to things like direct translations. There's certain things you would never translate from one to the other because you just wouldn't say that. I mean, especially colloquialisms as well. There's stuff that just wouldn't translate. I mean, there's stuff we could say here which would be quite normal, but if I went to England, there's no way I could say that because it just wouldn't make sense. So it's something to just be aware of, and I see what you're talking about. The strength of words and the power of words can be quite, especially with everything going on this year and last year. Reading, I don't read newspapers. I don't watch the news, but when you go on to news websites or when you go on to newspaper websites, sometimes you see maybe it's the English teacher in me. You see how powerful certain headlines can be. Very easily and very, very quickly. I don't think I noticed as much, or maybe it's just because I haven't read newspapers in 15 years. I don't know, but I'm much more aware of just the power of language, and it's the very, very subtle things that someone might just pass off as a comment. I think the most famous one, because since I do work with refugees and asylum seekers, one of the most famous ones that always stuck with me was during the Syrian refugee crisis when it started in 2000. Well, it started before, but when it became a major news story in 2016, then Prime Minister David Cameron used the phrase "a swarm of refugees coming to the UK."
Yeah,
and everybody is like, "Hang on, a what?" Yeah, because in no point is a swarm going to be positive.
No, I was just going to add, and then actually also non-verbal language and non-verbal communication as well. Again, we were talking, I think last time about the two-fingered salute, but the gesture, that eye contact or lack of it can be violent. Or it can be a microaggression, or sort of a very pointed looking away from somebody. And now, if we're teaching language, we're teaching communication, and that includes that. And when I'm teaching speaking specifically, I'm teaching sort of conversation and discussion. I'm always also talking about eye contact and body language, and that not looking at the person who's speaking. Well, that's kind of aggressive, actually. Because you're making a point of not looking at the person.
It's one of those things when you're doing, especially exam preparation, is you have to, especially if it's the Cambridge exams where you're there with another student and the examiner, you have to give body language to show that you're listening. You can't just go into standby mode until it's your point to talk again. You have to actively show that you're listening without actually standing there saying, "Yep, I'm listening," and hold a sign up. Be easier, but you can't do it.
And it's interesting the lack of eye contact, for example, that I've found in teaching online, especially where for whatever reason cameras or the video feed isn't working very well. So maybe with the poor connection, we've turned cameras off. Well, it's massively demotivating to talk to a bunch of grey squares. even as a professional. But at the same time, it's also then when there's a lack of understanding, you can't see the face.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's what's brought this really home to me, is that, and there's actually something quite, and actually the tone of voice can change quite a lot. So when a student doesn't understand and there's no eye contact, their what can often be actually way more aggressive than, or it sounds like it, because you can't see their confused face. You can only hear the frustrated what.
Especially if there's a delay in connections and stuff as well, because then you get into a lot of other problems. I mean, recording a podcast while not being in the same room together is also quite a challenge.
Same country, right? But yeah, I think this has driven home to me just how much those little, the eye contact thing, like there's an inherent violence as well in looking away in that respect, and not having the facial connection, I suppose.
Inquiry is an interesting one, because as English teachers, I mean, you and me used to have the same poster in our rooms above the board in Catherine's, where it said, "If you knew everything, you wouldn't be here."
Yes.
Just to, I think it's okay. I mean, it's our job to encourage curiosity. So I mean, there's a difference between saying yes, I know that, and yes, I'm interested in learning more. Especially in language as well. I mean, fair enough, not everybody who comes through our doors is going to be into language the way we are. I mean, we're sitting here with, masters in English and TESOL and stuff and linguistics. But there's that understanding as well that not every student is here for that reason. And we just have to, it's inquiry and encouragement, I think, go hand in hand.
Right, and actually, but the curiosity doesn't necessarily just have to be about language. I mean, I'd love it if it was. I can sit for hours talking about language, but I was thinking about this in terms of sort of specific classroom activities that you could do to encourage curiosity. And I was thinking, rather than comprehension for understanding from a listening or a video or from a reading. I mean, after all, unless comprehensions are well designed, they can be quite performative, But instead, you watched this short clip. What questions would you like to ask the characters? And so they practice question formation. They practice, being curious, if you like, about something. But and in the target language, and maybe they even try and answer each other's questions about the characters, or curiosity about what happens next. Predicting, like even that sort of predicting stuff can come down to curiosity and inquiry and or even mini research tasks. I think out something about and come back to me.
I think this is a good thing where CLIL can really come into the classroom as well with a lot of things. You were talking about different stories there. What I like to do, and I think you need to get the students on your side first because it is a wee bit weird, is stories from completely different perspectives. So maybe in the classroom, everybody is a certain, either a person and or inanimate object. Everybody's done stone soup. Well, one of you is the cauldron, one of you is the stone, one of you is the water, Now, how does that change the story and give that a personality kind of thing? Gets the little ones quite involved. I think it's just anything we can do to pique the interest of our students.
Yeah. Changing perspectives in stories.
Exactly.
Retelling something from the other point of view.
Yeah.
Which also comes into these other things, representation. It comes into action. It comes into peace, and just thinking about the other person's perspective, and not always from your point of view all the time.
I think I used to just do this with young learners, and then I thought I'm going to do this with everybody. Was one of the best things on YouTube is it about 2.5 minutes? It is the trailer for Planet Earth 2.
Oh, right.
Whatever topic you're doing on, it works for geography, it works for animals, it works for a lot of, it's pretty universal. It's a load of clips about animals, but it's done in a dramatic way with pretty cool music. It's 2.5 minutes long, and it gets people so into it. It's such a simple thing, but it gets people so into whatever you're doing in the classroom.
And what do you do with it?
Well, for example, there's a lot of units, for the younger learners with animals. So and it's not the standard animal. So it's now we know what a bear, a tiger, and a lion is. But let's watch this video, and there's pretty cool stuff. Or you can use it for past tenses with what happened here, what did you see going on, kind of thing. Or even sort of geography little lessons for the older ones. I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Nice.
Because it's such. I mean, it's Planet Earth is pretty well known now. David Attenborough, everybody knows David Attenborough. But
yeah, of course.
It's the animals you don't necessarily expect to see, and it's that unknowing thing as well. I mean, I'm quite lucky here because at least as bad as Belfast Zoo is, I know what a lemur is because they have hundreds of them here. Certainly don't have Komodo dragons knocking the teeth out of each other. So I mean, who's seen Komodo dragons or giraffes fight a lion? But it gets them in, it's dramatic score as well. So it gets them, it's Hans Zimmer actually. So I mean, it's everything you want from a 2.5 minute video, and it gets people into it.
Right, so the final one is perseverance, a crucial life skill. And I think go on.
Crucial life skill, but it's probably the most important one for learning a new language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have to be okay with getting things wrong and just keep going and keep plowing through. Because you're going to get knocked back 400 times. You just got to get up. As long as you get up.
And then a 401st time.
But as long as you get up a 402nd time and be prepared to get knocked down the 403rd time and get up again, you're grand. Yeah.
I think getting students to see the value in redrafting, which may not end up being very useful in terms of an exam preparation, but if it's done early enough in the sort of teaching process that it's already part of the sort of the way of doing things, you do a piece of writing, you get some feedback, and then you take it apart and reconstruct it, for example, or different ways of approaching part 4. In the first certificate exam where you have sentence transformation. Like my favorite, genuinely part of the exam, and my students' favorite, ironically. I'll have them come to me and I'll tick the words that are right in each one, or underline, send them away. Almost there, keep going. And it, if done in the right way, it becomes actually quite, it sounds quite frustrating. But actually, it's done in the right way and with the right relationships, if the relationships are already there and the expectations are already there, actually it becomes this kind of who can be the first person to get every word right in number 1.
Exactly, yeah.
And it becomes a competitive, fun activity.
Yeah, this is when you're listening to a podcast of two weirdos. You're talking. It's two English teachers who love use of English part 4. I think it's the best part of the exam because there's so much you can do with it to turn it into a fun activity. And there's gonna be people listening to this going, "What are you talking about?" Maybe we should do like a mini pod special on use of English part 4.
Part 4.
Yeah. Because my FCE classes last year, I had so much fun with just like you said, turning it into this challenging competition of who can do this the fastest, who can do this the best, who even down to who's deleting the right words properly, is just I think it's great fun. But as bad and as infuriating as those, what are they called now, infographic things you see flying around the internet is, one of the ones that I do think we need to make students aware of is, I'm sure you've probably seen, the graph, which takes you from where you are now to success. And you'll get usually all this nonsense you see on LinkedIn where it's it's a straight arrow going from the bottom left to the top right, and that's where your success is.
And it really isn't.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is students know that is probably the biggest squiggly line they will ever experience in their lives. And that's fine. Yeah. I think it's the being able to admit you're wrong, going, right, that was rubbish. Next, and then, like I said, getting up again.
And speaking of infographics, the iceberg as well. that 10% above the waterline, the success, everything going right. Well, yeah, beneath the waterline.
The endless nights of crying in a dark corner.
90% of it is the work that goes into producing that 10% of success.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think all in all, the new Parsnips are definitely the way forward. I know it was a blog on materials writing, but I think it translates perfectly into everything we do in the classroom, and how we get on, how we talk to our students, how we teach, and just how we get them from A to B, and being perfectly fine with they could go through the alphabet 16 times, but we're going to get them to B eventually.
What do you make of the new Parsnips, Victor?
I actually hadn't heard of those.
Excellent.
Nice to see you're our first ever call-in listener. I have no idea how I'm going to edit this to put it in the thing, but I will work out something.
Yeah, I don't know whether. All I was thinking when I said to call in, I don't know whether you wanted to say anything about any of the specific Parsnips, like if you had anything you wanted to add about inquiry
or even the old ones.
Yeah.
For instance, from the ones that I was listening more closely to, maybe for representation, I would just say something. Even though I think that the three of us work with international course books. We here in Brazil, I have this feeling that whenever something that looks, I'll try to put it nicely. Whenever something looks or feels contemporary.
Yeah.
In that people are in that characters in the books, or even the texts in the books are a bit are modern, are really actually talking about what we have to talk. People feel like, oh, this is too modern, this is too much, this is people not ready for this. That's one of the common comments I get. So
okay, that's quite an interesting one.
I'm very afraid of embracing differences and I'm not saying anything which is actually modern in our society, but I'm saying things such as race and ethnicity.
Yeah,
it's been around forever. If sexuality, I kind of understand because it's a recent-ish thing, but seriously, race in Brazil, we have to. We must. But it's such an old thing. I feel kind of sad to see teachers doubtful about using books because they're too inclusive or they're representing too much.
Oh, that's quite an interesting take on it. Yeah,
inclusive.
Almost goes to. Okay, I've honestly never considered that.
No, I would assume so. I think teachers, on average, we would just love the very idea of there being something modern and different, right, for us to bring to classes.
Yeah. Do you think then there's almost a want then for a more older version of Parsnips, the old traditional books? I mean, the way you said that to me, I just for some reason automatically assumed it would be an older generation asking for this is too modern, or do you have anybody like in the 20s and 30s asking for something this is too modern?
Only I would definitely have to do a proper study, but in a very generalized way, people who are less qualified in that they have been teaching for a shorter amount of time, or they're coming from different areas, because we have this culture of people who have traveled abroad, a month in Miami, working at Disney World, and then they come back to Brazil. Hey, I'm an English teacher, so we have to cope with those.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I'm getting too political about this, but I really am. I think it's a very sensitive topic because I think that our profession needs to be much more valued. So when we have to discuss those things with people who obviously do not respect the profession nearly as much as it should be respected, I feel like really. So I think, unfortunately, there would be more for older generations, and people who have been on it for such a long time that now I don't know, it feels like it's a personal thing. It's not as professional as it should be. So that's why I usually feel that representation is still a taboo in all courses and materials. But it's something that I love seeing being discussed more.
Yeah. I think that's something Chris and myself were talking about before we actually started recording the podcast, was the like you said, the respect of the industry and the profession itself. Chris sent me a video last night on a Armenian English teacher who has academies in Russia, who was saying, there is a stereotype in Europe of people leave university, they go somewhere to teach English for a year, to travel, and like a lawyer I ran into, he called himself a lawyer, I ran into in Oviedo one time, he said he was going home to a real job. So he was, the speaker last night was basically saying your passport and your flights, what you see is just something to pay your way around Europe or the world or the Pacific or something. That's my career. That's my, what you see as a non-respectable industry is my permanent career.
I think that's been a very interesting discussion of the old and the new Parsnips. It was a pleasure to have our first call-in guest as well, the return of Victor Hugo from Brazil there. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. As always, we welcome your feedback on Twitter. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Slán foil.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Phrasally Verbocious. If you'd like to get in touch, you can tweet us
at PhrasallyV on Twitter.
You can email us
phrasallyverbocious@gmail.com.
You can check out our show notes online at
phrasallyverbociouspodcast.blogspot.com.
And please like, review and comment us on your podcast subscription service of choice. Goodbye.
Goodbye.